Will you please, if you have your Bibles in front of you, turn to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, and I'd like to read verses 19 through 24. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 24. Hear the word of the Lord. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. I would like to thank everybody in here who was willing to answer the question that I posed to you probably about a month or so ago. My goal is to get to 100 people to ask that question. I'm at 90 right now, so I've only got 10 more to go. And it's related to the video that I showed earlier. Let me share with you the results that I've gotten so far. Now, the reason why the tally that I'm going to give you doesn't add up to 90 is because I did give people the option of choosing two of them if they felt like that each of their parents had a different priority. But in case you don't remember, the question that I asked was, what did you think that your parents most wanted for you to be? Successful, smart, good, or happy? And the results that I've gotten from the 90 people that I've taken this are 46 said happy, 27 said good, 25 have said 25 have said successful, and 7 have said smart. Honestly, I don't find the results to be that surprising. And the reason for that is because I've had the chance to not really deeply read, but glance over a few polls that have been taken, a few studies that have been done, which seem to say, if not actually outright say, that parents in general did not have a very high priority for their kids' spiritual well-being. In fact, one study that I looked at actually suggested that only about 4% of the parents who were polled thought that their kids' spiritual well-being was their number one priority, instead of things like monetary success, happiness, finding a good spouse, good job, and so on. Now, before I go on, I hope that nobody in here will take anything that I'm saying as a condemnation of parents. Okay, I realize I'm not a parent myself, but from what I have observed in how parents raise their kids, including my own, when it comes to raising Julie and myself, and man, it is a hard job. And I've discovered that it seems like most parents pretty much stumble and bumble their way through raising their kids. Not every method works. For those of you who have multiple kids, most likely they're very different from each other, and so you found that the way that you go about raising, say, your oldest, probably is not going to work with the next, and so on and so on. As I said, parenting is extremely difficult, so I hope nobody in here will take this as a chastisement. But I do believe that we need to start reconsidering what we are teaching our kids. And not just our kids, but I think this is applicable to everybody. What we are teaching everyone. I think that we need to change our priorities when it comes to what we want to encourage others to be first and foremost. We don't live on an island independent of each other. All of us have an effect on each other, for better or for worse. And in so many cases, we don't have a clue how a word spoken or a deed done will affect another person for better or for worse. Sometimes we'll see it, many times we won't. But I think that the results of the poll that I've taken so far bear out one undeniable fact, that the world can influence us far more subtly than we may want to realize or we may want to think. Now, I probably could have had Matthew 6:24 be the key verse here. No one can serve two masters. He'll hate the one, love the other, or vice versa. No one can serve two masters. No one can serve two ideologies. One will always take precedence over the other. Now, the first thing that I think we need to remember is that of the four traits that I asked about, as well as what Rabbi Telushkin talked about, is that these traits ultimately are independent of each other. To put it another way, being good doesn't automatically mean, therefore, that you're going to be smart. Being successful doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be smart. Being happy doesn't mean you're going to be successful. And by the way, guys, we believe this even if it's subconsciously. What's the saying that all of us know and maybe have quoted on occasion? Money cannot buy... Exactly right. Money cannot buy happiness. And in the same way, none of these four traits have anything in them which inherently means that they're going to lead to another one. And none of these traits have anything inherent in them which stems from another. To put it another way, if you're a happy person, that doesn't mean that you're happy because you're successful. If you're a good person, it doesn't automatically mean that came because you're smart, and so on. And so on. As I said before, there's nothing in these traits in and of themselves which guarantees that another trait will be present. Now, being successful or smart is definitely worthwhile, and of course, all of us want to be happy, and there's nothing wrong with these traits in and of themselves. Hope nobody in here thinks that I'm saying that or trying to imply it. But there is a good question which we need to pose to ourselves. How are these traits of positive value if being good is not at the top of the list? Look again at what Jesus said in Matthew 6:24. You cannot serve both God and money. One of the two will take precedence over the other. Period. You can't combine the two. And even if you did combine the two, well, now you're following a new ideal, and that ideal is going to take precedence over anything else. And by the way, did you notice a few verses back that the Lord said that where your treasure is, your heart will be also. Your heart will be wherever it is you decide to serve. Consider the following hypothetical. If you're broken down and stranded on the side of the road, what kind of a person do you suppose would be most likely to pull over and help you? And furthermore, you could probably even ask the question, what kind of a person would you want to pull over and help you? Would you want a successful person, a smart person, a happy person, or a good person to help you? Is there any guarantee that 3 of the 4 would even pull over in the first place? There's not a guarantee at all. Exactly right. Remember what I said earlier, none of the 4 automatically connect to the other. Sometimes they do. Don't take me the wrong way. I'm simply talking about what's inherent in each of them. And yet I wonder to myself sometimes if we, myself included, if we make the mistake of assuming that goodness automatically exists in each of these other traits, especially when we look at successful people. I think that a poster child for this would be Bill Cosby. Now think about Cosby. Funny man, very wealthy man, has an image of being a family guy, infectious smile, good-looking man with good-looking kids, just seemed like an all-around nice fellow, and how did that turn out? And yet, how many of us automatically believed, even subconsciously, and I'll put myself in this category, I'm not proud to say, but I'll put myself in this category. We automatically believed that because Bill Cosby was a wealthy, funny, and a smart man, he must really be a good guy. Just a really nice guy. I'd love to have a beer with him sometime. You know, the reason you can, as I said a moment ago, the reason you cannot serve both God and money is because both make different demands from you. Have you thought about that? Have you thought about the demands and the expectations that money has for you if you make it your number one priority, as opposed to seeking the kingdom of God and his righteousness and that and the priorities that it has for you? Let's consider each of them for a moment. Let's start with education. Now, I'm not in any way, shape, or form down on education. I'm not trying to lambaste it. If you have a desire to continue your schooling and to get a degree in whatever it is that it might be, I say more power to you. I think that's great. Not down at all on education. But we need to remember that some of the most evil and wicked people who have ever lived were and are highly educated people. Very intelligent people. You know, we could probably spend our entire lives writing down the names of exceedingly educated and intelligent people who advocated some of the greatest atrocities and greatest evils that man has ever done. You know, I was at my mom and dad's house about a month and a half ago watching the Bears lose. And while I was there was a commercial that came on for a loan refinance company. I'm not going to mention the name of it. Actually, I don't even remember what the name of it was now. But the commercial showed a mother at her laptop tapping on the keys, and the voiceover was something along the lines of, here is such and such refinancing her home in order to be able to save money, to be able to put in her 7-year-old daughter's college tuition fund, quote, so the world would be her platter. The world would be her platter. Now, maybe I'm making too much of this, but when I saw that commercial, the thought that entered my mind was, what kind of a monster are we possibly making here? Because, okay, sure, this young girl may have the world as her platter, and I'm sure that people like, say, Vladimir Putin would love to have the world for his platter. Or how about Vladimir Lenin, or Mao Zedong, or Stalin, Castro, Margaret Sanger, Karl Marx? I would ask all of us in here, would we want to have men and women like that have the world for their platter? I don't think so. Dennis Prager once said that there is nothing about a PhD that guarantees a person will be wiser, kinder, or more ethical than someone with only a high school education. Now, the opposite of that is also true. We need to be very careful. We don't want to automatically assume that a person with a lower level of education is automatically kinder, nicer, or more ethical either. Just because a person may not know how to read doesn't mean that he's automatically a nicer and more ethical person than someone with a double PhD in something. Theodore Roosevelt, former president of the United States, once said that to educate a man in mind and not in morals is to educate a menace to society. And again, I say, if you've read history, especially in the 20th century, you'll probably see that to be very, very much the case. How about success? Again, nothing inherently wrong with being successful. I'm glad that we live in a country where, for the most part, you can achieve success according to whatever your definition of success may be. And you don't have to be a multimillionaire in order to be a success, especially in God's eyes. But we need to ask the question again, if we emphasize success over any other trait, What barrier then will exist which will guarantee that successful person will be good? Look at the people who we would consider to be successful. How many of them are genuinely good people who honor their spouses, don't steal, harbor no hatred or covetousness towards others, and so on? Success is very, very subjective. You can define success in any way you wish, which isn't in itself necessarily a bad thing. But if you emphasize success over anything else, then there's another fair question that can be asked. What would happen if a person's success resulted in my maltreatment or harm? If you had to be harmed or put down or destroyed in order for someone else to be successful, would you condone that or endorse it? I highly doubt that we would. And happiness. I think it's telling that more people so far anyway have said happiness than any other trait. How do we usually define happiness? Is it fair to say that happiness is maybe something along the lines of how good we feel or how satisfied we are with a circumstance or person or a thing or whatever it might be? It's probably fair to say that. And it does seem like that happiness is what is emphasized in our world over anything else. Whatever makes you happy. How many of us have said that, and how many of us have heard that? But does anybody want to see what kind of a mess one can make of the world when happiness is stressed over anything else? If you want examples of that, just look out the window and look in the world today and you'll see that. You only live once. YOLO. Somebody once, what's that?
YOLT. You only live twice.
Well, if you belong to the Lord, that's absolutely correct. But somebody once said, and this may be a little bit strong to say, but somebody once said that YOLO is an acronym for those who don't have a clue what carpe diem means. Carpe diem, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is Latin for seize the day. You only live once. Life is short, have an affair. If it feels good, do it. The essence of hedonism. I mean, that's pretty dangerous thinking, don't you think? If we emphasize happiness over goodness, what kind of monsters are we possibly making? If we just keep saying to others, particularly to our kids, well, whatever makes you happy. What kind of a disaster could we possibly be setting up for them, and inadvertently maybe setting up for them? Like success, in fact, I would argue even more so than success, happiness is very subjective. You can make up your own definition of happiness, and it doesn't have to match anybody else's. Happiness is not a math equation. No matter where you are in the universe, 3 plus 3 will always equal 6. But one thing that may make person A happy may have a big time adverse effect on another person. What happens if your happiness is dependent on bringing harm to me? What happens if your happiness and my happiness are in conflict with each other? You see the trouble here? But guys, if we emphasize goodness over anything else, if we, as Rabbi Telushkin said, if we will reserve our highest praise for others, particularly for our kids, but I think this applies to anybody, if we will reserve our highest praise for others for when people act with goodness and integrity, how much better of a world, how much better of a church would we have? Consider a few things, guys. If a person's first priority in life is to be good over anything else, being good and having honesty and integrity is number one in a person's life, consider these hypothetical scenarios. Would such a person steal from his boss in order to enrich himself and satisfy his happiness? Would such a person cheat on a series of exams in order to boost his or her grades and get that scholarship to Harvard University? Would such a person cheat on their spouse in order to satisfy their desire for happiness? Would such a person falsely accuse his co-workers of wrongdoing in order to step over them for a promotion, thereby gaining success? Of course they won't. Now, does this mean that people who emphasize goodness over anything else are going to be perfect people? No, of course not. Not saying that at all. Good people can and will fall into sin, fall into wrongdoing. But they will do what they can to get out of such a mess. But good people, like happy people and successful people, are sinners too. From time to time, you'll stumble. But if we emphasize happiness, smarts, or success over goodness, is there any guarantee in itself that such a person will not do those things? Now, again, guys, don't take me the wrong way. I'm not saying that if you are a person this morning who thinks that being happy or being successful is more important than anything else, I'm not trying to put you down and make you into just a rotten, terrible person. You're no more rotten or evil than anybody else. And yes, there are a lot of smart people who are good. There are successful people who are happy. There are successful people who are smart and good and so on. I'm speaking in generalizations here. I recognize that. What I guess I'm saying this morning is that if we do not actively seek good, evil will always come about. Goodness and integrity are traits which have to be strived for constantly. Goodness does not automatically come naturally. In the book of Proverbs, you don't have to turn there. This is probably a verse that's pretty familiar to all of us. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is older, he will not depart from it." According to one biblical counselor by the name of J. Adams, he says that when you read the original Hebrew, and I'm not a Hebrew scholar, guys, I have to rely on what others tell me when it comes to the Hebrew, as well as I appreciate Brother Terry and his learning of other languages, and maybe this is something he can confirm for me. But according to J. Adams, the way that the Hebrew reads in that verse it's probably not best to translate that verse in that manner. He says that it's better to translate the verse this way: train a child after the manner of his way, and when he is older, he will not depart from it. Let me repeat it again. Train a child after the manner of his way, and when he grows older, he will not depart from it. In other words, guys, the verse probably should not be taken as this promise. And I know plenty of parents who have been very frustrated and battered themselves because they felt like, man, I did everything that I could to try to train my kids right. And, the Bible says if you train the kid the way that they should go, they're not going to depart from it. And, look what happened to my son or my daughter. And I don't know, maybe I'm just a failure as a parent. Well, leaving aside the fact that I really appreciate the love and concern that you parents have for kids, it's probably not the right way that verse should read. The verse isn't necessarily a promise that if you raise your kids right, they're going to turn out right. What the verse probably should say is that if you decide to train your kids in the manner that the kids want to be trained, they will not depart from that when they're older. How do kids usually want? Think, for those of you who are older, think about how you would have liked to have been trained by your parents. And think about it if your parents would have let you have your way every time. To put it another way, if you train your children correctly, there's no guarantee they're going to turn out right. But if you train your kids wrong, there's every guarantee that they're going to turn out wrong. You see how goodness is something that has to be strived after and taught? Evil is far easier. To paraphrase a sci-fi character, it's quicker, easier, more seductive. But goodness works a lot like a garden. If we do not continually tend the garden, what's going to happen? You have to be proactive when taking care of a garden, don't you? You have to continually work at the garden to pull the weeds out, make sure that the right plants are in there, and so on. You have to be proactive in maintaining a good ethical life that's pleasing to our Heavenly Father. But success, smarts, and happiness are not traits in of themselves that are effective in tending this garden. They just simply aren't. I mean, what is there inherent within success, smarts, or happiness which will automatically lead a person to be good? That's why we have got to be so careful what we emphasize to each other. We have to be careful when it comes to what we teach others. I agree with Rabbi Telushkin. It is important that we compliment those when they succeed in something. I'm not against that. Good job. Good job on the skit, guys. Seriously. Such and such is a really smart kid. That's a beautiful thing. But how much good are they going to do us if we don't emphasize being a good person over anything else? Let me give you a counterexample to this. Dad told me about a news report that he read online a few months ago. I'm going to apologize. I can't remember where this happened. But he said that there was a high school kid who was suspended from school for 3 days. And you know what this kid's crime was? The kid's crime was that he confronted and put down a bully who this bully was picking on and tormenting a blind kid. This kid goes and does the right thing, basically gets a bully to back off. Like I said, I don't know. I think Dad said that he actually laid hands on this bully and forced him off. And for that, he gets suspended for 3 days. Now, if this account is true, what kind of a lesson did that school just teach that kid? That doing the right thing leads to punishment? I mean, we hear all kinds of public service announcements about confronting and beating back bullying, and that's good. But again, I ask the question, what did that school just teach this kid by suspending him for doing the right thing? Yeah, there are trends in our society which genuinely concern me, and I hope that this relates to what I'm talking about. And I recognize I got to make sure that I pick the right words here, but there is a huge contrast in the values and the character between someone like, say, William Wallace from the movie Braveheart. Anybody here seen that? How many of you in here have seen the Mel Gibson movie Braveheart? Handful of you? Okay. There's a huge contrast between William Wallace, as he's portrayed in that movie, and the son of the English king, Edward the Longshanks. William Wallace understood the need to be good above everything else. He understood that a man's position in life was not there primarily to enrich himself, but to make sure that he protects others from injustice. If you have power, you need to use that power to protect others and ensure justice. I'm sure that William Wallace would say. The son of Longshanks, on the other hand, was a spineless, indecisive, effeminate, irresponsible wimp who enjoyed the status quo. And yet in our society today, generally speaking, which kind of man is denigrated, ridiculed, and put down and thought to be worthless? Which kind of man is praised and uplifted? If the trends keep going the way that they're going, it's going to reach a time when there will no longer be any good men left to protect us from bad men. And when that time happens, then what? I don't know if I should say this or not. I'm going to go ahead and do so. But if and when that time comes, maybe a little bit of advice for you ladies. Maybe you need to go and apply for your concealed carry permit. I don't like saying that. I really don't like saying that. But if the trends keep going the way that they are, you know, guys, we might be teaching our kids and emphasizing to others to be good above all other things, but based only on what I have seen from this poll, I don't know if that's the case or not. Let me repeat the results again. 46 said happy, 27 good. That's encouraging, by the way. I honestly expected good to be below success, but it hasn't happened that way so far. Successful, 25, and smart, 7. Whether through our words, actions, or attitudes, we are telling those around us otherwise, whether explicitly or implicitly. Let me tell you a story about a social worker who ran across a young boy who was crippled. He was crippled in his feet. But this wasn't a permanent injury. With enough work and enough exercise and training, the boy could walk again. And that is, in fact, what this social worker did. She worked hard with this child, worked hard with him, to get him to learn how to be able to walk again. And in time, over the course of several years, and there was frustration in some of those years, over the course of years, that boy was finally able to learn to walk and could walk normally. Now, several years after this happened, that social worker was invited to speak at a conference. During her speech, she told the story about this young boy and the trials that he had to go through in order to be able to learn to walk again. And then she asked the folks that were in the conference, she asked this question: what do you suppose that young man is doing right now? Anybody in here want to make a guess? Well, the hands went up. Well, he's a doctor. Or maybe he's a social worker like you, or maybe he is a lawyer, or maybe he's run for political office. All these lofty goals, which are understandable. I mean, the amount of work that it took for him to learn to walk, you put that same kind of effort, you could achieve those things. Well, they were all wrong, that social worker said. She said, that young boy is in prison serving a life sentence for murder. Then she proceeded to say that we were so obsessed with teaching him how to walk that it never occurred to us to teach him where to walk. Guys, I want to ask you, what are you teaching people? Where are you teaching people to walk? Is God teaching you where to walk? We are called as followers and disciples of Jesus to do right at all times, even if that means that our success or our happiness has to be relegated and pushed over to the side. You know what, guys? We're going to look like idiots in the eyes of the world. Heck, we already look like idiots in the eyes of the world anyway. The day may come where we end up eating canned dog food, and I'm not trying to joke around. I'm saying we may end up living in a shack. We might even end up dying for our faith. I didn't know this until I read this on The Blaze. But remember that man that shot up those 9 or 10 people at that college in Oregon a couple of months ago? I didn't know this until I read about it, but until I just read about it not too long ago. Did you know that that guy was specifically targeting Christians? This has been verified by 3 people that were there that saw this. According to one report, he heard the guy say that if you're a Christian, you're going to get a bullet in the head. If you're not a Christian, you're going to get one in the leg. We may be called to give up our life for the Lord, guys. But are we called to grab after the success and happiness which the world offers as our number one priority? I think this is what Paul meant. This is what Paul meant in his in that very misunderstood passage in Philippians 2, where a lot of Trinitarians think that Jesus was God and didn't think equality with God was to be grasped and made himself nothing and so on. I don't think he was saying that. He was simply saying that Jesus could have had the world on a platter, but he didn't. He could have had the kingdoms of the world for his own without the cross. You wonder, maybe that's what Satan was trying to do when he tempted Jesus. I mean, think about it. Think about it from the world's point of view. If Jesus would have taken up the devil's offer for all of the kingdoms to be his, all he'd have to do is just bow down and worship him. That would have been the smart thing to do. He'd be a success. I'm sure he'd be a lot happier. But Jesus didn't do that, did he? Because Jesus saw that his treasure was ultimately in heaven, Matthew 6:21, and Jesus wanted his heart to be where his treasure was. And yes, my friends, we are going to go through sorrows. I was reading in Jan Stilson's Church of God biographical encyclopedia. There was a pastor that lived in the late 19th century by the name of Ralph Lyon. He suffered from health issues which were compounded by his travels. And in one of his letters that he wrote to a friend of his, he ended the letter by saying, "Your brother in sorrow's vale, your brother in sorrow's valley." Guys, if you're going through sorrow right now, well, just remember that Jesus himself was a man of sorrows. Remember the Soggy Bottom Boys song, "Man of Constant Sorrow"? Jesus was the ultimate man of constant sorrow. Maybe not constant, but he was a man of sorrows. That's okay. May I suggest today, starting today, that we begin emphasizing doing good above all things. May I ask that from this day forward that this be a body of believers which will hold their highest praise for others for when others do good. Certainly, praise people for their success. Nothing wrong with that. Happiness can be a good thing. My favorite Old Testament author said that when times are good, be happy. Nothing wrong with being happy. Nothing wrong with that at all. But I say that we reserve our highest praise when people are being Christ-like. Because I think that most people, when their obituary is finally written, are going to want to have it said that they were people of integrity and honesty who always treated others the way that they wanted to be treated. Could you imagine what kind of a society? Actually, you know what? Don't even think necessarily about society. Could you imagine what kind of a church we would have here if we started doing that? If we started emphasizing goodness over anything else? I'm not necessarily saying we haven't been, but if you haven't been, you can start today by emphasizing goodness in the lives of your friends, family, your spouse, your kids, your parents, whoever it might be. Paul said, let's not give up the habit of doing good. I'm badly paraphrasing this, I'm sorry. Let's not give up doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Amen? Why don't we go ahead and sing our last song this morning?